afternoon and good to see you again. Thank you for bearing with me a second time today. I have no slides this time, so just a few messages, and I don't want to be repetitive. I actually prepare my messages on what we think is going to be one of the most important discussions in the next conference, which has to do with the following conference, WRC27, which is precisely the KU band and the interest that we're seeing emerging from the mobile community in this band. But I will perhaps take a broader look and try to add a few things on what you just mentioned. And you're right, Martin. I mean, the job of spectrum regulators is one of the toughest. Intrinsically, it involves trade-offs, right? So there will always be inevitably and sadly winners and losers in this discussion. But I think from an industry perspective, it's very important to have a propositive approach, that we don't see these discussions of a spectrum, whether that's at the national level or international level within the WRC context, as a battleground. And I think in many cases that's how we understand that. And at least from a OneWeb perspective, we don't want to do this. We want to bring to spectrum regulators and to ministers arguments, technical arguments, policy arguments. And at the end, we expect from you a balanced analysis that considers the spectrum needs of the different technologies and the merits of these technologies with regards to your own connectivity policies. So yes, the KU band, and while we have not seen, I believe, in any region except from the APT, the Asia region, a proposal for this band, let's say that the next IMT agenda item, we certainly believe that that will be the case, and we will start seeing, and you will start seeing proposals coming together in this band. The KU band is already a band that is congested in the first place and used by very important services. Importantly, it's one of the two global bands that can be used for satellite broadband services, both by GEO and non-GSO constellations. And as we have seen this morning in the panel that I share with my NGSO colleagues, the demand is only growing. If we focus primarily in the 14 to 14.5 GHz range, we can see the complexity in terms of the various services that already use this band. There is a primary identification in the 3 ITU regions, both for FCC fixed satellite services uplinks, and a secondary one for MSS, mobile satellite services. That's for the downlink. These two assignments, both primary and secondary, are used in combination to provide broadband services, both to mobility platforms, but also to fixed platforms all around the world. Also to remember that in this range, there are also aeronautical radio navigation services, satellite broadcasting, radio astronomers between the 1447 to 14.5 GHz range, and also space research services. So again, already a very complex band in terms of the different uses and sharing. Then I will focus on the importance of justifying demand, and it was already mentioned in the previous panel. But I think it will be important to understand, if we want to precisely have an open, well-informed, and a propositive debate on this, we would like to understand some fundamental issues from the mobile community. And by the way, it's a shame that we don't have representatives from the IMT community in this panel. I feel that it's a little bit unfair, but anyhow, what ranges? 7 to 24. It's a universe, and as you well noted, undertaking studies and going into a cycle with that huge range would be extremely difficult. What are the use cases? Also important to remember that, taking into consideration the characteristics of the KU band, 7 to 24 GHz band, we can see a lot of similarities to the millimeter wave band, to the debate that we had just recently on the last cycle on the 28 GHz band. and I'm sure we don't want to have that discussion again, right? REN attenuation, loss of power in free spaces, a congested band where contiguous bandwidth are difficult to actually put together, and are not bands for coverage. So we're not talking here about really bridging the digital divide. So that's something very important to consider. Some other facts. WRC19 just identified 4 years ago a total of 17.5 gigahertz of bandwidth for IMT. And it's worth repeating, in very few countries we have seen those 5G deployments to date. This range, the 7 to 24 gigahertz band, was already considered at WRC15, but ultimately not included in the WRC agenda because spectrum regulators, administrators recognize that this band had already multiple and simultaneous uses, and therefore difficult to be considered for an addition of the IMT service. To provide two benchmarks, in Europe, we believe there is no much appetite either for this discussion on the KU band. Ofcom pointed out in its spectrum strategy that almost 18 gigahertz are more than enough to satisfy the current and future demand of IMT through 2030. At the same time, or in parallel, perhaps before or after, doesn't matter, Ofcom decided to expand frequencies available to satellite connectivity to include precisely 1425 to 1425 gigahertz band. In this way, Ofcom aligned the use of the band with other geographies, Europe, the United States, and Asia Pacific, to mention an example. And also, I believe we have to think that IMT networks will have to become more efficient, right? And mobile operators are already using and will continue hopefully using spectrum reuse techniques by, for instance, reducing the space between base stations that will help them to make the capacity of the networks much more, will increase the capacity of their networks. So having said that, and just to finalize, we believe that in the context of this potential discussion and potential agenda item, I don't want to say that, but it's a real possibility. I think we will urge to give consideration to IMT allocations, and therefore, or subsequently, at a national level, IMT licensing in less contested, controversial bands, such as the 26 gigahertz band, possibly 66 to 71 gigahertz band. For instance, the 26 gigahertz band has a bandwidth of 3.25 gigahertz, which, just to contextualize, will be enough for 4 MNOs at 800 megahertz each one. The dialogue, obviously, with all industries about the requirements for additional spectrum or for protection of their spectrum assets is encouraged. We will be, as the satellite community, through GSOA, through GBF, and I'm sure on our individual capacity, the different operators, both NGSO, non-GSO, will be approaching you to have more discussions on the WRC 23 and again on the WRC 27 as the agenda comes together. And finally, as we discussed this morning as well, the economic considerations around spectrum management policy, of course, are very relevant, but hopefully not the only one. And we have seen recently very important examples, the case of the 5G auction in Brazil, which had a sort of more a social approach to it rather than a financial approach to it. So that's an example that I will also encourage you to look at. With that, I finish. Thank you very much.